Bull's future.
P7 for Toro Rosso last year in the Constructors' Championship. Chris, what's your inner spidey sense telling you about where this Honda-powered Toro Rosso might conclude 2018?
I'm going for a slight slide to P8, but that's better than most people were expecting when they joined with Honda, and they'll be more competitive than most people were thinking. So, fair few points in that midfield mix, but yeah, reliability issues and still just a little bit off.
Let's close our 2018 Grand Prix preview there, Mr. Medland, on a lovely little German/English, English/German team, Mercedes-AMG Petronas Motorsport. I think Valtteri did himself a world of good to close the season with a tantalizing drive. Granted, we can say that Lewis wasn't exactly starving for a win in Abu Dhabi in order to clinch the championship. We know that there are other drivers who would have loved to have beaten Valtteri there to close the season, but maybe their cars weren't completely capable. But he did, in my opinion, enough to have the team say, well, if we could have that guy, but have him show up at every round, there might be some hot fire here to consider as a teammate, a longer-term teammate for Lewis Hamilton. We've seen that their car has been quick like a bunny during preseason testing. Haven't heard a bunch of, oh my goodness, the such and such melted, this blew up or fell off. Sounds like this has been a fairly procedural Mercedes off-season to me. Before we get into the drivers and whether we think there might be a little bit more interestingness between the two of them in the championship, does this feel a little bit rote in terms of off-season Mercedes? They're going to do it. It's theirs. Just all they got to do is show up and they're champions? Or there are some other indicators maybe you've seen, Chris, that might have us following closer to see if they could be derailed?
I think the way summer testing went, we were thinking, yeah, clear favourites. And I still would. You know, if you asked me to put money on it, I'd back Lewis for the title. But I think there was enough weakness on the softer compound tyres during pre-season that they might not be able to exploit the full potential of the car all the time. It was something that we saw last year, that there was times the car looked incredible and there was other times that it really struggled on certain street circuits or on certain tyre compounds. And that is the challenge, that you need to get a usable car. It doesn't, it's all well and good having a quick car, but it has to be usable. And it's something Red Bull used to complain about when they said they had too much downforce and the tyres wouldn't let them use it all. And it's like, well, that's, they're the rules. deal with them. Otherwise, everyone would chase the same sort of design. So, I think we're seeing a strong Mercedes. I think they'll be winners here in Melbourne, but that's partly because I think they've just had a smooth pre-season and they look a little bit happier with the car than they were at the same time last year. I think that they've got a good handle on sort of the way its performance peaks compared to last year when it had its on days and its off days. But yeah, it's not going to be 2014 to 2016 levels, so I don't believe it will be. I think we've got still, and there'll be enough races we rock up and go, yeah, Ferrari could win here, or yeah, Red Bull could win here. And people will be tuning in because it's not nailed on who's going to win it. But yeah, when you talk about the drivers, I think one of the telltale signs that Mercedes has a good car is how motivated and happy Lewis was in testing, knowing he has that machine that will let him fight for that fifth world championship. Valtteri, on the other hand, is a bit like I was saying with Brendan. Really, I think he was brought in because it was when it was needed. It was a safe pair of hands that wouldn't rock the boat too much. Who would come in and do the job that they needed, but then it gives him the opportunity to impress. And as you say, there were some very good performances last year, and there were a few too many that weren't quite so good. And it is what divides the very good drivers with the great ones, is the great ones almost always produce their best or very close to it and have very few off days, whereas the very good ones just have fewer of the days where they access their ultimate performance. So I think Valtteri needs to show that he's able to have more consistent high performances. At the very least, he has to cut out the poor ones. He had some towards sort of the end of the summer and When we left Europe to start sort of the latter part of the season, he had some really poor weekends, and he can't afford that in the top team. So that's what he's got to really iron out. But he's the perfect foil for Lewis. He doesn't rock the boat too much, Mercedes, and Lewis feels like top dog there, and that just adds to his confidence and helps him perform. So what Valtteri needs to make sure he also does is when he is close to Lewis, or if he does beat him, that he still just keeps the peace as such, which I don't think is a change from just his demeanour, his style, the way he's always been. He's never really been confrontational in any team, and it works for him. He still can perform without having to resort to that sort of thing. So I don't think he'll need to, and I think he can secure a longer term future there. But the pressure is on. It's only a 1-year deal he's got at the moment.
Sounds to me like evil Valtteri is who we need to see. And because the guy who doesn't rock the boat, who doesn't really concern Lewis in any way, shape, or form, and we saw what he could do when Lewis had nothing to lose or win, really, to close the season. But there were far too few instances where oh my goodness, this kid is absolutely a raging animal, and beware. So I can tell you that if he turns up this season and does the same thing, it would be odd to expect anything different from him, other than being a very solid, maybe a P2 in the championship, Drivers' Championship if all goes well, and if not, a very credible third place behind Sebastian Vettel if all goes well there. But I look at Valtteri and I can see that. We know the raw intensity, as we spoke about earlier. It's something that fueled Kimi for quite some time. He would, I think, certainly benefit from that. But looking at Lewis, I mean, last year in our season review, I just referred to him as kind of hippie Hamilton. This kind of like, hey man, it's all good. Go out and do my thing. I'm not going to get too wound up. The hating my teammate and all of that acrimony, that didn't go so well for him with Rosberg in the end, at least. What have you seen in Lewis in preseason form or mentality and approach that might lead us to believe that cooler, calmer, I'm just going to go out and be a rock star, man, kind of thing that seemed to work well for him on the rebound last year has been carried over? Or do you think that little bit of nervousness that really was his undoing in 2016 could be waiting in the wings somewhere in the back of his head?
No, I'm very much of the opinion that it's been carried over and that we're going to see the same from Lewis because of the stability that's at Mercedes. Same technical team, James Allison with a bit more influence, produced a strong car, same teammate who he knows he got the better of last year, like you say, who he knows won't sort of really try and rattle his cage and make it personal. And they get on well enough. But Lewis is never best friends with anybody sort of on the F1 grid. He just does his own thing. And Mercedes has now created an environment where Lewis can do that. And that's the same environment that he had last year, and it helped him perform. And he learned from last year how he performed at his best towards the end of the year. He'll have sort of picked up on changes he made, or the way he focused himself, or what he needed to happen for him to produce that. And sometimes Lewis needs to sort of feel like he's up against it and that things aren't going for him to produce his best. And I think it was when the Ferrari threat continued through the summer that he was thinking, I'm behind now. I need to turn this round. But when he did it in such spectacular fashion that I think he's just at such peace that he knows he could go out and dominate the first few races, and title's almost as good as his. He could go out and struggle early on, and we could have a real three-way battle. But then he'll know that's when he can also access his best because he's got a tight fight on. I don't think there's a scenario that unnerves him. And that's why I think we're going to see, the calm, assured, cool Lewis that we got last year. And when it all comes down to it, we've got the two of them fighting, Lewis and Seb, for their fifth World Championship at the same time. I mean, that's brilliant for Formula One to have. We hope that Ferrari give Seb the car that's good enough to do it. It looks like Mercedes has done the same for Lewis. But what a story that is, even if it's just the two of them going head to head. So even if Lewis doesn't have the challenge for Valtteri, having it from the outside from Seb, it's for a big enough prize that his motivation is going to be there. But yeah, I think we're gonna get the sort of top level Lewis that we got at times of last year.
I do love that it's a low temperature burning intensity from Lewis. I appreciate the fact that he recognizes he has the best equipment. He recognizes he's better than his teammate. And rather than allowing that to be something where he relaxes a small amount, he seems to have found that ability within himself to create that artificial pressure or tension, as we spoke about a little bit earlier, where, whatever, whatever else is going on, that's fine. I know what I have, I know who I am, and I'm just going to go perform and be that person, and when we're all done here, the high probability is I'm going to be world champion. Being able to know what you are, know what you have, and then find really no reason to step back or destabilize yourself because you do realize you have everything to get the job done. And that's a thing we've seen many drivers trip themselves up with in the past, and it's all in their heads. And a lot of what we've spoken about here today, Chris, is obviously driver psyche, mentality, and whatnot, but for those who work in and around athletes or were, serious athletes, you realize that, look, man, if you're a fan of basketball, they all wear shoes, they all wear shorts and a tank top, they bounce a ball, they all have immense talent, the rim is in the same place. How these players get more out of themselves than others who don't, it's really about what's going on upstairs that separates the ones who we revere and celebrate and those who we speak about in terms of what could have been, or if only they were able to. So I think we'd be safe in saying that P1 achieved by Mercedes in the Constructors' Championship last year. You going to go out on a limb, brother, and suggest that something like that might happen again this year?
Oh, no, they're going to be struggling for ninth.
Salbert, watch out. We're joining you.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think just to bring it a bit full circle, actually, when we talked about whether the atmosphere with Ferrari and the kind of situation that has for Seb and how he performs, whereas that's quite volatile, I think Mercedes have created the atmosphere where it's the opposite for Lewis, and it's the best one for him to perform in. So that's one of the reasons I give them the edge as well, even if the cars are more equal like they were last year. But from the early signs of testing, yeah, the pace is there, and the Mercedes, yeah, I'd be surprised if it's not another championship. But I also see it being much more 2017-esque than any of their dominant years.
So if we are pulling money out of our pockets and betting, who are you naming as world champion driver? And I realize that we don't really have a most improved, biggest surprise type driver or team award, although that might be something for Liberty to think of. But I think we know where you're going to go in your world champion driver pick. But give us either the one team or the one driver where you'd say, hey, F1 fans, watch them from early in the season, because I think they're going to do something out of the norm from what they've done in the past, or you might really have a new team or driver that might become your fan based on what's coming that might not be expected.
Yeah, so you're right with the world champion. Going to go with Lewis. But for the maybe unexpected success story, I'm going to go with Kevin Magnussen.
Ooh.
And Haas, especially at the start of the season. I could have picked either of the drivers there, but I think Haas are going to be right up there in the mix. And yeah, they're the ones to watch. There's still going to be plenty of honourable mentions. I think Stoffel's going to impress this year. I'm really excited to see what Leclerc can do, but I think he's just going to be restricted by his machinery. But yeah, I'll go with keep an eye on Magnussen, because there might be I'd back him for a much bigger point total than he had last year, put it that way.
Let me ask one final question before we close here, Chris. So we're moving into, I think, an important stage of Liberty Media's involvement in steering Formula One in what many hope is a even better direction.